And now that we know how we can use the learning activity sheet, in this time wherein students cannot be in the classroom for face-to-face instruction, now I'll share to you some tips on how you can design your own learning activity sheet. So first is we look at the format, because there is a standard format that we follow. So when you make your learning activity sheet, kindly take note of this very basic guidelines. The font that we use is Arial or Times New Roman, and the font size is you have 2 for elementary, for junior high school and senior high school. Then we have 14 point, and then for our younger students we use 18 point. So notice that the size of the font now becomes a constraint for us not to be tempted to put a lot of information in an activity, because our goal is just to provide the basic idea that the student needs to learn for that concept. The spacing is 1.5, and it should be just 1 page. So if you're making a learning activity sheet and it exceeds a page, that is already a very good indicator that the learning activity sheet is already very long, and you have to shorten it. Assess what are the things that you can remove, and what to make sure that only the basic idea is there, and the size of the paper is legal, or we use 8.5 by 13. So now that we know the basic look of a learning activity sheet, I'll share to you some tips that we've learned over the years of implementing the dynamic learning program and using the learning activity sheet. So first is when you write a learning activity sheet, take note that we always have a title, and the title is something that the student will have an idea already of what the lesson is all about. That's why it's very important that the title must encapsulate the main idea to be learned. So the more simple the title, the better. So our goal here is just by looking at the title, the student will already have an idea what the lesson is all about. Next, after the title, is the target. So when you write down targets, we limit our targets to 1 to 2 only, because again, we want to focus on one major concept only. When you have a lot of targets, that is already a good signal that maybe it's about time that you make several learning activity sheets so that you can separate your learning targets. And for teachers, making the targets will not be very difficult, because it is similar to the objectives that you write for lesson plan. And please take note that it should be phrased from the point of view of the student, and we need to refer these targets from the DepEd competencies. So after the title, you have the target, and then the last for the basic is you need to cite references. So it's very important that that we respect intellectual property. So if you got the idea of this learning activity from a book or from an online article, it is very important that you cite these references, so that this will not be so that you will not infringe any copyright. So those are the 3. Before we proceed to the next tip: title, target, and reference. And in the main concept notes, please make sure that the concepts, the questions, and the tasks address the learning target. So if you have a target, it should be aligned. The activities that you provide should be aligned to your target. And lastly, the questions and the exercise that you have should progress from easy to medium to difficult to engage even the intellectually challenged. So what I have here is an illustration wherein you can have several activities when you're starting to write your learning activity sheet. And again, our goal is you have these activities so that you can achieve the required competency. Now, sometimes when we make activities, we make it in such a way wherein it becomes very challenging. And if it becomes very challenging, we can liken it into this diagram wherein the transition from one activity to the next will be very difficult. So if this is a flight of stairs, then we noticed that mahihirapan ng bata na umakyat sa second activity because it is too difficult. And kung hindi ito magagawa ng bata, then the kid will not be able to achieve the required competency. So for example, what we have here is a competency in grade 7 math wherein the learner illustrates, names, identifies, and defines the different kinds of angles. So notice that there are a lot of things that the students need to know. Now, this competency is very broad, but we can chunk it into several learning activities so that we still achieve this learning, this required competency. So instead of having a very difficult activity, what we can have is this one, wherein you can have many simple activities, and even though there are more activities, it will be easier for student to transition or to progress from one activity to the next so that he will be able to reach the required competency. So this is what we were talking about a while ago, that in designing a learning activity sheet, we try to divide a very complex task into smaller steps so that it will be more manageable to students. That's why even if the students are not in school, they're at home, learning can still continue because what we gave them are independent student activities that they can answer so that they can still reach or achieve the required competency. So aside from this, there are other things that we can look into when you're writing an LAS. And we have here a very simple checklist, LAS. First is we'll try to look at the LAS. So when we say look, we check the layout, the length. Is it just one page? Did I use the correct font and font style, font size? Is the spacing 1.5 or is it single? And the layout. It's also very important that we present our lesson in such a way that it can be easily understood by the student. So aside from looking at the look, then second is we need to check if it is appropriate and accurate. So what do we mean by appropriate and accurate? First is, can my students finish writing this LAS? The LAS of a grade 1 pupil is very different from a grade 10 student. So we have to make sure that it is age appropriate. And most importantly, we have to make sure that the accuracy of we can verify the accuracy of our content. So, and lastly, aside from the look and being appropriate and accurate, we should also see if it is self-contained. So when we say self-contained, it means that will the students understand this lesson even without the use of books, the internet, or the intervention of a parent or a student. And this is very important because again, we're looking at a scenario wherein the only thing the student has here is the learning activity sheet. So we can do the LAS check, the layout, if it is appropriate and accurate, and most importantly, if it is self-contained. Other tips that I want to share with you is, number one, when you're writing your LAS, make sure you use well-defined terms, especially for subjects like math and science. Sometimes a student finds the lesson difficult not because of the lesson per se, but because of the terms that we use. So we have to make sure as teachers that we provide them with the definitions or the terms so that they'll be able to understand the lesson better. So this is the part wherein we will unlock the difficult words for them. Second is we need to make sure that we observe correct grammar and capitalization. The use of LAS is also a means for the students to practice their written and oral communication skills. So by writing a lot of learning activity sheets, they also learn a lot of things in terms of mechanics and spelling. Aside from looking at the grammar and the other mechanics in writing the learning activity sheet, it's also very important that we provide vocabulary and definitions in all the subjects. As practice, what we do is before we present a lesson, we try to provide them with, let's say, a glossary of terms. So for example, before talking about genetics, what we can do is we can have an activity wherein we will just define all the terms that we need, that the students need to know about the concept of genetics before we proceed to the lesson proper. By doing that, we know that our students understand what we are talking about in the LAS because they know the definition of these words. For math, it's also aside from that, is we have to make use of individualized small illustrative projects and simple hands-on activities. There are a lot of activities aside from concept notes. A while ago, I shared with you that an LAS can be in the form of a laboratory report or a drawing activity. And for math, it's very important that we provide the clear and step-by-step solution and calculation, so that we can model to our students that chicken scratch work is not allowed. Also, we don't use calculators because we want to practice their accuracy in terms of solving numbers. So these are just some of the things that we hope can help you when you will make or create your own learning activity sheet.
For updated details about CVIF DLP or CVIF Dynamic Learning Program, continuously follow us and visit CVIF DLP Facebook page, CVIF DLP discussion group, and DLP.ph.